Brexit influences various aspects of British everyday life, though the specific effects, of course, can vary from person to person and also depend on factors such as occupation, location, and personal circumstances. Changes in trade relationships and customs procedures led to disruptions in the supply chain and in increased costs for imported goods, and this results in higher prices for certain products, impacting household budgets, so especially the low-income ones. The availability and variety of certain food products are affected by trade disruptions. And there are changes in the selection and sourcing of imported foods. I know this from a lot of my friends in the UK as well. Additional checks expected next year could escalate food prices further, worrying industry chiefs. New checks on food imports, which haven't been fully implemented or delayed for the fifth time now, will see additional charges of between £20 and £43 on goods. UK borders have experienced also a visible impact, especially during peak holiday seasons. Long queues at Dover and gridlock traffic have become more common, with a combination of factors blamed by the government. Yeah, I just blame one factor. Meanwhile, at airports and international railway stations, British citizens can no longer use the border check lanes for EU citizens. They usually have to have their passport stamped when entering and leaving the EU. And traveling through the Channel Tunnel could soon take 4 times longer due to new EU biometric border checks. Expected, this year, next year, EU will bring its new entry-exit system, and people entering the EU will be required to have their fingerprints scanned and a photograph taken to register them on a database the first time they enter a member state, leading to extended queues at borders, creating a challenge for travelers. Experts believe the system will be introduced after the Olympic Games in Paris next summer. And changes in alcohol duties have been introduced post-Brexit, with reductions in draught beer and cider duty rates, but an increase for packaged beer and alcoholic drinks. Leaving the EU has given the UK increased powers to overhaul the way alcohol is taxed, and the PM claimed his measures make it easier to protect pubs. However, pub owners like Tim Martin from Wetherspoons express concerns over potential tax inequalities affecting their businesses. And Brexit ended free movement, requiring Brits to secure visas for work, study, or just for living in the EU. Buying homes in Europe is still possible, but Brits cannot stay for more than 90 days of every 180 without permission. And the rules for short-term visits to most EU member states are set out in the Schengen Borders Code. However, their eligibility to live, work or study in an EU member state depends on the host country's national immigration laws and visa requirements. So much about not having control of the borders. The supply of labor from Europe has declined, impacting sectors like transport and hospitality. Labor shortages have led to opportunities for UK workers, but also contributed to price hikes and reduced service availability. And across the labor market, there was a shortfall of 460,000 EU workers between January 21 and June last year, including 103,000 in wholesale and retail, 67,000 in hospitality and food. And knock-on effects of this included businesses such as restaurants reducing their hours because they just couldn't find staff. The government's plans for this wonderful bonfire of EU rules faced a backlash, especially around core workplace protections originating from the EU, such as maternity pay and equal pay for men and women. A U-turn saw plans reviewed with just 600 pieces of EU law under scrutiny, but questions remain about how these changes might affect workers. And post-Brexit, free roaming within EU member states is no longer guaranteed for UK citizens, causing surprises for travelers who now face potential roaming charges. Somebody recently revealed he racked up a £200,000 bill during a 4-day holiday in Turkey. And phone companies are now allowed to set their own rules, which with vastly different approaches, although Turkey is not an EU member. Ordering goods from the EU now involves complex import VAT and excise duties, and under the new rules, import VAT and excise duties apply for all alcohol, tobacco, and perfume products ordered from the EU. Another pitfall HRMC has warned shoppers about is making sure sellers do not charge them VAT, as they could be charged twice. And there are also new costs attached to receiving gifts from the EU. Is a gift valued at over £39, the recipient must pay VAT. And if it's over £135, customs duties come into play as well. And that is probably the reason why we see a development in the polls regarding a new Brexit referendum at the moment. The poll also recently surveyed how much progress has been made with the Brexit deal, though the results show little satisfaction. Less than a third of people think Brexit is done, while almost half said it is not complete. And I can tell you it's not complete, not for a long time. When asked how they would vote if there was a referendum on rejoining the EU, half of the participants said they would vote to rejoin. By contrast, 30% said they would vote to stay out, while 7% said they would not vote. Remain voters are overwhelmingly in favor of another referendum, with 41% saying there should be one this year, 61% saying so within the next 5 years, and 70% in the next 10 years. Only 8% of Leave voters support a referendum this year, 16% think there should be one in the next 5 years, but still 20% of Leave voters think there should be one within the next 10 years. And YouGov, who did the survey, their data shows that dissatisfaction with the government's handling of Brexit continues to be very high, with 72% saying they are doing badly. And 62% believe Brexit has been more of a failure than a success, and a majority with 55% say they were wrong to vote to leave in the first place. If there is another Brexit referendum that wants the UK to rejoin the EU, the UK government would have to follow a number of steps though, so it's not that easy. You might have seen my video on the rejoining. The government would have to announce that it is holding a referendum on the UK's membership of the EU, of course. And the government would have to set out the terms of the referendum, including the question that will be asked and the options that voters will be given. And the government would have to campaign for the option that it supports. But the government would have to provide information to voters about the pros and cons of rejoining the EU, but hopefully without lies this time. And the government would have to ensure that the referendum is being held fairly and that the results are respected. If the UK votes to rejoin the EU, the government would have to start negotiations with the EU on the terms of the UK's membership, and I can tell you they would be different to the last ones. These negotiations would be complex and time-consuming, and it's likely that it would take several years for the UK to rejoin the EU even in that case. The UK government would also have to make a number of changes to its laws and policies in order to comply with EU law. And these changes would be extensive, and they would have a significant impact on businesses, individuals, and the government itself again. Rejoining the EU would be a major undertaking for the UK government, but it's theoretically possible if there is a clear majority in favor of rejoining. The government would need to be prepared to invest significant time and resources into the process, and it would need to be willing to make the necessary changes to its laws and policies. So if you haven't seen my video on what it would need to rejoin the EU, you should have a look, because it's not as easy as some people imagine. It would be a very tough one. And it's a tough one for some of my loyal viewers as well, that I have to tell you now. There will not be a live stream on Sunday, because on Saturday there's my birthday, and I decided to try to take the weekend off for once. I'm working most weekends of the year, so I'm trying to take off this one. And that's why there will not be a live stream on Sunday. There will be videos on Saturday and Sunday, of course, but not a live stream. And if you want to see another video right now, the next one is here on the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.